I want to say welcome to everyone who has joined us on this webinar today, and thanks to our partners at Georgia Bio and our partners with MassBio and others joining us today to talk about our community and to be readying ourselves for life sciences. Life sciences is one of the fastest growing industries in the state of Georgia, continues to be year over year, and we're thankful for that and for you and your participation today. So know that you're sitting here looking at, and we'll all introduce ourselves at some point. But I am Jane Caraway. I'm the Director of Life Sciences for Georgia Department of Economic Development. And I'm proud to be a partner with each and every one of you across the state as we continue to grow this business. I will introduce ourselves, but what you're seeing here is the team along with you that represents Georgia and life sciences on a daily basis. So Maria, I'm going to turn it over to you and thank you again for all your hard work.
Thanks, Jane. Before I get started, I want to make sure, Eddie, did you have anything to say on behalf of the MAC as Jane's co-chair?
Yeah, well, good to see everyone here today. I'm Eddie Lai. I'm the Senior Manager of Life Sciences and Digital Health at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, where we cover 29 counties in Metro Atlanta in the state of Georgia. And as we say, a win for the Metro is a win for Georgia and vice versa. So we're really excited to help the people here attending and also those that you will talk with after to learn more about how to be prepared and how to learn how to continue to tap into and support this growing industry so that we can make this industry and eventually help people in Georgia be as successful as possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eddie, and thanks, Jane. As Jane mentioned, my name is Maria Thacker. I'm President and CEO for Georgia Bio. We're excited to be here with you today. And I apologize. I want to make sure, can y'all hear me okay and see me, Eddie? I still see you. Yes, okay, great. We're excited to have everyone here today and our guest speakers from Massachusetts and Virginia and a couple other states. The reason we put this together is to really provide answers to questions we've been receiving as a community and as an association. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes, walk through who we are as an organization in just 1 to 2 slides, and then I'm going to do a little bit of Life Sciences 101, and this is going to take less than 3 or 4 minutes, I promise you that, and then we'll turn things over to our guest presenter from our counterpart up in Cambridge at MassBio, and following that, we're going to invite Don and Jonathan, our experts in real estate and development and architectural, the architectural world, to make a few remarks and then answer any questions you all have. We want this to be a very fluid and engaging conversation for all of us. So please, as we go through this presentation, drop your questions into the questions chat. And we will work through some of those answers as we get through the initial presentation. We're excited to welcome a number of community leaders we have been in regular conversations with, like the city of Johns Creek and the city of Alpharetta, and then some new partners that we've had some early conversations with over at Artropolis, DeKalb, Augusta, and all sorts of other communities around the state. So thank you all for joining us. If I forgot your name, I apologize. I have only so many screens and I can't get to everybody, but we're here to be helpful to you all, to provide expert information and workforce development support for the life sciences here in the state of Georgia. So with that, I'm going to share my screen 1 second as that comes up. All right. All right, so a little bit of Life Sciences 101, and some of you may have seen this if we've recently met with your community. So first, about us, Georgia Bio, our mission is to advance the growth of Georgia's life sciences industry and foster strategic partnerships to create a healthier world. We do that through a handful of core things. That's advocacy and government affairs support. So we work to coordinate on behalf of our community and our business community, whether those are small startups that need some support, to state and federal government relations with policy leaders, government affairs representatives from large pharma like Johnson & Johnson, Genentech, and others. And we do economic development support and PR. So things like today's program is part of our advocate and promote section of what we do. Connecting the community, that is the biggest value of our membership and our community. That is done through, again, programs like this, but our annual conference, social events like our Bio Bash and happy hours we may do around the state. And then communities and networks that are specialized based on our industry groups like our MedTech Alliance and an HR network and a few others. And then finally, our Inspire vertical is, and Educate really is our BioEd Institute. We're the only institute in the Southeastern United States that specializes in life sciences training and building a pipeline for the industry and the needs that it has. We have do everything from supporting our big companies like Takeda and Boehringer Ingelheim Animal Health to supporting small startups by providing career centers and an online career center for our companies and just direct support as they're looking for industry experts to join their team. Finally, I just want to point out we are the state liaison of a number of federal groups, including Bio, AdvaMed, and Pharma up in DC. And the CSBI, I also point out, is a coalition of all the bioscience institutes nationally. And the CSBA is all the bio associations. We all are well connected. That's why our friends from MassBio are here. And we do whatever we can to support each other. So let's do a little bit of 101 here. What are life sciences? And I'm not going to read this whole slide. But in short, it's a study of living organisms and life processes. Biotech, it's really harnessing cellular and bioprocesses to develop technologies. Medical devices, which we do represent as part of our community, is it's a device, instrument, apparatus, implant, even your Band-Aid is a medical device that can be used to help deliver a pharmaceutical or biologic, or simply help with a mechanism or action within the body. So those are some very basic just definitions. These are available online, and I'm always happy to send this slide deck after the fact. We as an organization represent a broad swath of communities. I will say this doesn't represent what all the bio affiliates nationally do. We do include medical devices. It's one of our fastest growing sectors in the state. And we also include global public health as well. But this is a variety of words and terms you may have seen and heard. Of course, we've also heard of digital health, which is, I think, one of the largest. We're one of the largest communities here in Atlanta in particular for digital health. But there is an intersection between digital health and therapeutics. And as these communities continue to find ways to come together, I think that's a huge opportunity for us here in Georgia in particular, to really dive into things and become experts in things like digital therapeutics and other areas. But the digital health community that we represent tend to be those that are working with FDA managed or USDA managed regulated devices and technologies. And frankly, if you're working on a medical device, if you don't have a digital component, you're already obsolete. So all of our med device members are really diving into digital health. But there's lots of areas here, and we are very proud to represent them and work with all of our academic institutions as well. And then finally, I'm not going to go through this. I just wanted to remind a number of people that may not be aware already that this is, we as an organization put out research reports every few years on the state of our industry with support from our partners at the State Department of Economic Development, as well as the Chamber, and then some of our industry partners as well. So our most recent report came out in October, this past October, and we do it about every 2 to 3 years, just so we can show growth. But there's been, and I'm realizing the slide is cut off a bit, but we've grown from over 2,000 to 4,000 entities in life sciences in the state of Georgia in the last 3 years. And our salary average range is approximately $93,000. And the last thing I just want to state on this is one of the biggest gaps in life sciences employment is actually requires only a technical degree or even a high school degree with some certifications. So we, in particular at our institute, spend a lot of time working with TCSG, the Technical System of Georgia, and a number of partners throughout high schools and four-year colleges to support that pipeline growth for some of our larger scale companies in particular, like Alcon, Takeda, BI, Dendreon, and a few others. So please know we are a partner to you all, and we do a lot around economic development through our workforce development programming. And we're here to be a partner for you. So now that we've, and this is me and Kristen, we have a larger team, but if you need anything, we're always here to be supportive of you all. And don't hesitate to ask a question. I've been doing this for 17 years and I still haven't gotten a dumb question. So we're here to be your partner, and we're very grateful for the growing industry here and the growing association that we are. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn things over to our friends at MassBio. And I believe, Ben, you're still there. I just can't quite see you.
I'm here.
Yes, and we're excited to welcome you virtually to Georgia. But I appreciate it was great meeting with you a couple weeks ago with the Bio Convention, and where we all came together from all over the world and got to see old and friends and meet new ones. But it was really exciting to connect with Ben and hear about his role at MassBio. So I want to turn it over to you, Ben, and invite you to introduce yourself, your role, and I know you have some slides to share with us. So Ben.
I do, and I'm working on making sure that you can all see those slides. Can everyone see me now?
It
See
is
the
up.
slides, rather?
Perfect.
All right. Perfect. So my name is Ben Bradford. I'm head of external affairs here at MassBio. Have met Maria, have some friends that are part of the Georgia Bio system, have met some of the folks from Trammell Crow and other developers in real estate down in Georgia to talk about what's happening down there. So when Maria asked me if I'd present what our BioReady Communities programs were, I thought that would be a great opportunity, because as Massachusetts is known as one of the best places in the world for R&D, we view it as part of our mandate to help others. Because at the end of the day, here in Massachusetts, our mission as MassBio, it's to grow the industry in Massachusetts, add value to the healthcare system. But at the end of the day, we're here to improve patient lives. And we know that good science doesn't only come out of Cambridge, Massachusetts or Boston. It comes out of Savannah and Athens and Atlanta. So the more we can help communities around the country and around the world develop life sciences ecosystems, we're happy to do it. So here's a little quick overview of what's happening here in Massachusetts. And I'm going to give an overview of MassBio, what we do, some of the programs we run, and then where we've been and where we've gone and how I think this might be able to work for Georgia. But feel free to jump in. I know there's questions at the end, but if there's something, feel free to put it in the notes as well. So in the ecosystem here in Massachusetts, we have over 1,000 biotech companies directly. We have 18 of the top 20 largest global companies, and then we're continuing to spin out innovation out of our ecosystem. And when you think about this, all of this goes together, right? We don't have 18 of the top 20 companies here for no reason. They come here because we have the early stage companies, and the early stage companies are spinning out of our academic institutions. And the reason they're staying here in Massachusetts is because they have real estate and locations to expand. So as we think about what creates a real ecosystem, especially as it relates to research and development, it's those early stage growing companies that are working on unmet medical needs. But Massachusetts hasn't always been the #1 place in the world for life sciences, right? You look at this picture here, and the photo on the left is Kendall Square in Cambridge in probably 1985. And it's somewhere you really didn't want to be after dark. It was parking lots, it was old factories, it was run down. And on the right-hand side is probably 2012, and it's developed even more since then. And most of what you're seeing there is life sciences labs. It's not offices, it's not factories, it's straight R&D. So, you ask people, how did the state of Massachusetts become #1? And there's really 3 things to think about. And we'll go chronologically. And the first is slightly crass, but it was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. When JFK, obviously from Massachusetts, was president, he wanted this building this area right here to be the R&D for NASA. Obviously, JFK was assassinated and his successor was from Texas. Cambridge, we have a problem, doesn't sound quite the same as Houston, we have a problem. But what did Massachusetts get? We got this building right here, and it's a national transportation monitoring site. Obviously, it's necessary, but it's not going to be an economic driver like NASA could be. So this space remained empty. And along the river here, you have MIT, and down over here, you're going to have Harvard, and companies that were spinning out of Harvard and MIT started to fill this space in Kendall Square. And part of that was because, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, they understood what to expect out of Cambridge and Kendall Square, where they didn't know what to expect out of other municipalities. The second thing that helped create the Massachusetts ecosystem was the creation of MassBio in 1985. 6 companies kept seeing each other at Cambridge City Council meetings. The Cambridge City Council was afraid to give these companies that were then doing genetic engineering, it wasn't even called biotech, they were afraid to give them access to the public water supply because they thought there'd be monsters coming out of the sewers. So these 6 companies, they hired a joint lobbyist to educate on the municipal level, and we still do that today. And we also do it at the state level and the federal level. So having an association that represented industry was huge, and that's what you all have with Maria and the Georgia Bio team. And the third was the government involvement, right? Without the state of Massachusetts getting involved, who knows what this ecosystem would have turned into. And something that I talk about often when I'm speaking with international delegations is the consistency that we've seen here in Massachusetts, and the consistency regardless of party in charge, whether that's at a municipal level, at a state level. When you look back at the Life Sciences Initiative, which was a piece of legislation that was written by then Governor Mitt Romney, obviously a Republican. 2 years later, Democratic Governor Deval Patrick invested $1 billion over 10 years for this industry. And there's a number of buckets, and we can touch on that in the question period later. Governor Patrick, regardless of the fact that it was a Republican piece of legislation, he funded it. 10 years later, Republican Governor Charlie Baker reauthorized the Life Sciences Initiative. And then 2 weeks ago at the Bio Convention, our new Democratic Governor Maura Healey announced that she would be reauthorizing the initiative as well. And what this does, it allows industry to know that they have a partner in Massachusetts state government, and that you can't say enough about understanding the values of government and what they see as economic drivers. And this is an industry that has really kept Massachusetts out of economic downturns in the past, certainly in 2008, and then who knows what's going to come in the next 18 months or so, but our industry is certainly powerful here in Massachusetts. But it also wouldn't have happened without real estate development, right? And you can see that you'll learn more about the BioReady programs a little bit later, but this map shows municipalities in Massachusetts that are rated by MassBio as bio-rated. And there's 4 different levels: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. We'll touch on those a little bit later, but you can see it spreads across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's not just Cambridge. It's not just one development. It is locations throughout Massachusetts that are readying themselves to host life sciences communities, or companies rather. You can see the development that has happened here in Massachusetts. And the reason that I talk about this is because it really makes people understand it's not just one development that creates a cluster. It needs to be continued development. And then we often talk about, what makes Massachusetts, Massachusetts. And obviously our academic institutions and our hospitals and our life sciences companies play a major role in this. But the fact that we have sophisticated architects, construction companies, and developers is huge, because they understand what life sciences companies are looking for. And they also take risks. They're willing to build these sites on spec without companies being ready to sign a lease. For a number of years, there was 0% vacancy in Kendall Square, and that was a problem for our companies, right? At the end of the day, our end users and the most important members we support are our life sciences companies. And when there's 0% vacancy, that means they're not growing appropriately. That means they're not succeeding or failing. It means they're not getting their data. So these developers were building sites on spec, and now we have a little bit more flexibility in the market here in Massachusetts, and our companies are growing appropriately. Here's a list of and we can send this around, and Maria, I'll send you the deck, or you already have the deck. But these are the levels of our BioReady communities. You can see it starts at bronze, and all that allows is municipal. All that means is they have municipal water and sewer, and their zoning allows for lab or manufacturing by special permit. This shouldn't be too hard. And it's something that companies often use when they're figuring out where they want to locate. We actually have a board member who chose not to look at this and located his new manufacturing site in a municipality that was not bio-rated. They ended up having to, instead of having access to the sewers, they were pumping wastewater into huge buckets outside of the facility, and Veolia had to come twice a week to empty those. He regrets that decision every single day. But it's not automatic that our municipalities are going to want to support this industry. There's still a number of folks that don't understand what's happening within the four walls of a lab. So we've made it our mission to educate municipal leaders across Massachusetts what the life sciences are and what it means and what BSL 1 through BSL 4 mean. BSL 1 and 2, you're only gowning up to protect the science from the scientists rather than the other way around. And that's what most of the work here is in Massachusetts. But this is what the effect of the life sciences has been here in Massachusetts, right? You can't have what we have here without the real estate. And that real estate, there's no more room in Boston and Cambridge. So we need to spread it across the Commonwealth. And I imagine expanding operations in Atlanta is not easy. So spreading the life sciences industry across the state of Georgia is awfully important as well. And we talk about the value that this industry, Maria talked about the industry and the value that it provides to Georgia. Massachusetts, these 106,000 employees offered about $21 billion in taxable income to Massachusetts last year. So it's why the state continues to invest. But it's not happening without the funding from the federal government and venture capital as well. So when we think about the money that this industry can create and the jobs it can create, it's direct from NIH funding for the hospitals, the colleges, the universities, and then it's the venture capital. And this is for the spin-outs coming out of the hospitals or the colleges and universities. This is money that is going to pay wages, it's going to buy equipment, it is supporting the economy here in Massachusetts. But at the end of the day, what we touched on earlier is this is really about the patients. So this investment here in Massachusetts and what investment in life sciences economic development could mean in Georgia, it's for the patients, right? 15.6% of the US drug pipeline is happening here in Massachusetts, and that's just headquartered companies. It's not the companies that are the large pharmas that weren't created here. So this gives you a sense of everything that's happening here in Massachusetts. But it's also giving us an opportunity to create jobs and careers for people of all backgrounds. BioVersity is a workforce training program that MassBio will be launching with an aim at individuals that don't have a 4-year or a 2-year degree. We'll be creating certificate programs that are going to run for about 16 weeks and really teach the basics of working in the industry, whether it's lab support, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's manufacturing support. And these are jobs that are going to be in the mid 5 figures here in Massachusetts. But it's also important because if you want the industry to grow, you need to make sure the talent pipeline is there. So Maria talked about the programs that they run. We're doing the same thing here in Massachusetts. But at the end of the day, we're not doing any of this without the support of government. So it's great to see municipal government on this call. Mayor Wu, the mayor of Boston, is funding workforce training programs, and Governor Healy, I already mentioned this, she's going to reauthorize the Life Sciences Initiative, but is also launching a Pathmaker program to fund training in the life sciences. But the last slide I want to end with is all of this economic development work, while it's great for Massachusetts, we at MassBio are doing it because we're patient driven. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're giving our members who are working on unmet medical needs access to the space they need to help patients around the world. So that's what I've got for you. A quick overview of what's happening here in Massachusetts, but I'm happy to answer questions a little bit later.
Great. Thanks, Ben. That was a really helpful tone. And I think some people are going to be really interested in seeing that booklet on municipalities as well, including myself. So I think we're going to turn things over now to Eddie Lai with the MAC for some Q&A once we have Dawn and Jonathan introduce themselves. So I'm very grateful to have with us a couple of experts. I know some of our municipalities have posed questions to us around codes and specific rules that might be in the state of Georgia and things they need to think about regarding the industry, especially with some sites that might be some communities that may be considering investing in innovation parks. So with that, I'm going to invite first Don to introduce themselves and make some remarks. So Don Bush is with HKS, and he's a principal and regional director of the life sciences practice at HKS, and he leads business development activities and manages relationships with the private, academic, and government life science clients. He has been doing this for a number of years now, and really brings a lot of expertise around laboratory planning and design for research and science education as well. So with that, Don, if you want to add anything else about yourself, we'll certainly hear about it. But if you have any remarks, please go ahead.
Please. Thank you so much, Maria. Great pleasure to be here today. I grew up in Georgia. I am a Georgia Tech grad, spent most of my career in Georgia, so very excited to be in this conversation today. My mother still lives in Macon. You know, I have done in my career, I've done everything from ag labs down in Tifton to research buildings at Emory and Tech to work with the College of Veterinary Medicine at UGA, so across the state of Georgia. So again, particularly excited to be engaging in this conversation about what's happening in the industry in the future of where the jobs are going in our country here. So I've been doing this for a long time. I think what I wanted to touch on today, Maria, I really appreciate the point, and Ben, about the point about education here, which is why we're here today with this. I was thinking about what to bring to this conversation today, and I think building on what Ben was saying it is specifically about having conversations and educating with the authorities having jurisdiction, the county, the municipalities, about what the codes actually say. All buildings have rules and regulations, but once you start getting into science work, research laboratories, you're working with chemicals, you're working with hazardous materials, you're working with controlled substances, it becomes particularly complicated. And, there are some municipalities and jurisdictions in Georgia that have a lot of experience with this. I think the first time I met with a DeKalb fire marshal about laboratories was like 1995 there. And so we had, long-term 30 years of conversations with folks there. If you are new to this, my takeaway would be, I encourage you to engage with your architectural engineering, code consulting, construction partners in this conversation. If you have questions, we are always glad to share and discuss this because we live and breathe it every day. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Not that there's going to be anything here that's going to be particularly, let's see, I think that works. Here we go. If folks are seeing my screen, this is literally, I just pulled up this morning. This is coming straight off the state of Georgia's various websites. You have construction codes. So everybody's familiar that we have all of these kinds of codes that we have to address in here. But because nothing in this country from a regulatory standpoint is ever straightforward, you have the construction side that the building department looks at, but you also have to look at the fire marshal and the state and the safety fire commissioner. So there's a whole nother set of interwoven regulations that we have to address. And again, not to say that, again, I'm not expecting anybody to see or read this, but just understanding that this is a conversation. So what we try to do very early in every project, and even before the project, even in the zoning discussions there, is to really get into this, because it's, there are a lot of nuances here and there's no one size fits all rule. And we have to sit down and make sure that everyone at the table is very comfortable, because the safety of people in the labs and the safety of the communities around the labs are first and foremost. That's not a question. That's never a question in there, but there are a lot of different avenues and pathways and situations that have to be discussed. So I would say that, my first comment would be to really engage with your design, engineering, and construction partners as a jurisdiction having authority early on, and be open to meeting during the course of the project, because we really don't want you to see the project when it lands on your desk for permitting the first time. We really want to have these conversations much earlier in it. So please encourage your building departments, your fire marshals, to be available, open and engaged, and have that conversation so everybody is very comfortable about what we're doing in the space, and that the community is comfortable what we're doing there to ensure their safety. And the only other one I wanted to share, because this maybe it's a little bit easier from a graphic standpoint to understand, is, like I said, buildings have rules and regulations. So as we start looking at buildings, it gets quite complicated relative to what you're doing, even within each floor of a building in here. So again, this is something that we're, not for today's conversation, but just understand that in addition to the life safety aspects, we also need to talk to you about organizational principles and how that works within a facility there. on that side. So, and I think with that, I would also say, I think the comment that was made earlier about zoning and that kind of thing. One point, I think, Maria, the panel that we were on a couple months ago, I think together was interesting because in a subsequent panel that I was also on, actually several subsequent panels, the term ecosystem was mentioned over and over again, and it is about community. It's not about one building, it's about the totality of everything that's happening around it from a life science standpoint. And that's not just lab buildings, it's about housing, it's about support facilities, it's about everything else that comes around with it. So when you're thinking about building your life science community, it's not a single building issue, it's a totality of the community and what it takes to attract those companies. I was on a panel with Kipton Courier from Activation Capital in Virginia. They're developing a new incubator facility in Richmond. And Jonathan was actually at that same event actually in Richmond. And she made the point that one of their challenges is not just building this building, is they don't have the right kind of housing near that project. If they're trying to attract these companies to move to Richmond, they need to have the right kind of housing that the people that they're trying to attract are looking for in there. So, again, it's not a narrow focus. You need to think very broadly about the totality of the life sciences in there. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thanks, John. And next, I'm going to invite Jonathan to introduce himself as well and make any comments. Now, he comes from the CDMO world, so contract development and manufacturing world, and has been doing that for over 15 years and held senior roles in lab operations, founded a couple of companies, and he's built and retrofitted a number of different laboratories during that process. So he brings a lot of expertise in particular to his current employer over at Clark Construction. So with that, Jonathan, if you want to make any remarks yourself before we start addressing these questions. And while he's making those remarks, if anyone has any questions, I have the first one in the comment, but please go ahead and enter it there in the Q&A. Jonathan?
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I represent Clark Construction, which is the local contractor based out of Atlanta. Our regional office is based out of downtown Atlanta. We've got more than a century of building civil construction, which is everything from vertical to horizontal to underground. Our portfolio includes award-winning laboratories and research centers across the country. Over the last 2 decades, we've been successfully completing about $1 billion of life science facilities for leading research institutions such as Genentech, Argonne National Labs, Johns Hopkins, NIH, FDA, as well as a whole range of respected universities, UCSF, UCLA, University of Maryland, et cetera. Our building professionals bring deep technical expertise to this and unique understanding of complex and operational needs to the life science market. And my role in particular is I help bridge the end users to the construction world. I used to run 2 of my own biotechnology companies here in Richmond. We had an international footprint. And so when I had the opportunity to come to Clark, it was a great change. And I'd like to echo everything that Dawn said and just build on 2 points. Again, the ecosystem is very complicated in the life science, and you have to have everything from bioanalytical all the way up to manufacturing. I've expand all of that and can definitely see the need. And then also the venture capital behind this, having sophisticated investors who know biotech is extremely important.
Thank you. Well, with that, Eddie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully we'll get a couple more questions. And, frankly, Ben and others may even have some reactions to Jonathan and John.
Great, thanks, Maria. Yeah, like Maria mentioned, we wanted to take this time in this webinar specifically, especially if we have folks like Don and Jonathan, specialists, and Ben, virtually visiting from Massachusetts, and their knowledge on the ecosystems and kind of the, from nuts and bolts to strategy and larger experiences for the audience to be able to ask any and every question that they might have. And so I know there's one in the queue right now, but as we go into the time, I invite everyone who's listening in and learning from the programming so far to put in any questions they might have using the Q&A function specifically. And so just to kick us off, I am going to take a question that was submitted by the audience member. I have a question from Nicole Dozier. The question reads, and panelists, you can take a look as well. It says, hello, we have vacant sites at our medical offices that we would like to convert into labs. We have already changed our zoning codes to allow the use, and we need to know specifics on the types of modification dollars that will be needed for the sites. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Glad to jump in, Eddie. This is a very common question. We get this, especially with what's happened post-COVID with the office world and remote work. A lot of folks looking at repurposing or redirecting either existing or in the progress development away from office space or other kinds of uses into research laboratories or other kinds of space in there. I would say specific to this particular question, look at Nicole's question, there is obviously one of the fundamental difference between a general office building and space for research is laboratories are all single pass air. You do not recirculate air within a laboratory environment. So from a standpoint of existing building infrastructure, or if you're planning new infrastructure, just understand that the HVAC needs, particularly the air side infrastructure, are, very different in a laboratory environment than they were in a traditional office environment in there. And then that also impacts plumbing, electrical, everything else relative to what's in the building. The challenge, and Jonathan, please jump in on this, obviously, and we have this conversation with our developer clients all the time, is, at what level of infrastructure are you willing to invest in to adapt these buildings if you don't have a tenant in place? If you have a tenant, let's say you've got an empty building, you're converting it, Pfizer wants labs in there, then you can have a very specific conversation. If you're just converting this as a spec space to attract startup companies, existing companies, whatever the case may be, then you have to have a very nuanced conversation about what's your first cost and your investment versus what you're going to push off to whoever comes into the building in there. Jonathan, from the construction side,
Yeah, so the big thing that I want to jump in is knowing the end user would be really helpful, because then you can have a purpose-built space and you can really dive into what is their unique science. Are they doing more manufacturing? Are they doing R&D? Because both of those are two different things. Or are they taking more of a hybrid approach where they're doing R&D, manufacturing, and clinical diagnostics all in the same space? We use the term life science as a very strange umbrella, because you can break it down into at least three different buckets. You've got pure R&D, which has one set of requirements. You've got manufacturing, which is a totally separate set of requirements. And then you've got clinical trials and diagnostics, which has a third set of requirements. So each one of those is unique. And then to this, the specific types of modifications, spec space is very difficult to build out. However, speed to market. And one of the things that North Carolina has done very, very well is they've basically put up a shell. And then when manufacturing companies in particular come in, they just want to put in their equipment and off to the races. And so if there's something that we can do there, that would be a really good conversation. It's worked astoundingly well in North Carolina. And Nicole, I'd love to have a conversation with you to see what our local office can do.
Absolutely. I think that speed to market's a really good point as well when you're talking about the infrastructure, because we often get questions like, well, if I just put in the pathway and the conduit, but I don't buy the generator, for instance, I just put a pad and we wire it up and we'll push that down the road. The challenge is, if anybody on this call has built anything in the last 3 years, it can take 18 months to get a generator. If you got a client coming in and needs that space in 3 months, that's a problem. And so this is where, there's cost and time, and we have to reconcile and balance those.
I mean, from my perspective here in Massachusetts, every time we have a company looking at additional space, the first question we get is, how soon can it be operational? Yep. Especially given the investment environment in our industry right now. Companies are getting data and then they're getting funded, and the investors then want that money working for them right away. And I can speak to a little bit of what we're seeing here, not necessarily on medical to lab, but certainly there's been a hesitation from our members going from office to lab conversions right now, especially as there's been more purpose-built stuff coming online in Massachusetts. So it could be good for now, but as more purpose-built stuff comes online in Georgia, certainly that's going to be the preference for a lot of sophisticated companies. I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but that's what we're seeing up here.
Great. Well, even to that point, between Don and Jonathan and Bren's answers from different experiences, we even have a call to action from Jonathan to Nicole. So appreciate that. And Nicole responded in the Q&A section saying, great, love to hear from you guys on this. And they said that they have an entire district inclusive of housing, workforce, etc. So hopefully a fruitful conversation can come from that. I do have a couple other questions that we'll get to that are in the Q&A right now. One question, this might be for the larger group, but it asks, does Georgia have a BioReady community designation that cities and counties can apply for?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Eddie. It's Maria. So no, but that's kind of the purpose of this event. We wanted to educate this community about this, see if there's interest, which I do believe there is, and understand, as Ben just indicated, a bit more about how Massachusetts, MassBio went about creating this, and find a way that we can work with our ecosystem, and specifically our ecosystem council, which is made up of economic development leaders and led by Eddie and Jane right now, to create this. So the answer is not right now or not yet, but will work with the leadership and the council to definitely find a pathway to create that designation and make sure it's all encompassing, and hopefully be able to lean into Ben's experience.
Great. And that leads us, and I think, Ben, you might touch on this soon, but I wanted to ask you if you could tell us in the webinar more about the process of actually getting certified as a BioReady city.
Absolutely. So the creation of the program was before my time here, and it was originally created to get cities and towns to know what the industry was and be ready for it. Right now, we have an application on our website, a handful of fields. It should take no less than 10 minutes or so to fill out, and then that goes directly to my inbox, and there's a review panel of one, which is me, that takes a look at it, and then we rate the municipality. Obviously the questions on there are fairly easy for me to research and check out and make sure that everyone's being upfront. But something we have seen over the last, call it 5 years, as the industry's expanded out of Cambridge, we also have a heat map of our membership base and can see where those companies are. And they're really starting to funnel to municipalities that are platinum rated. And so we're seeing that growth 30 minutes west, 60 minutes west of Boston, and really in the municipalities that have taken the time to become BioReady rated.
Excellent. So question for Don and Jonathan. Some cities and areas are reassessing their codes to be more biotech and life sciences friendly. What type of codes do we need to keep in mind in these areas, keep in mind, or create or change?
So, I shared up on my screen, we're governed by a couple different codes that affect this. The International Building Code, which is one of the state mandated codes in there, and also the International Fire Code, and then trickling down through bits and pieces of NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association stuff in there. One of the challenges is, and I'm not sure this is actually solvable at a municipal level, because it's honestly not solved even at a national level, is, as an example, the International Building Code and its predecessor codes refer to laboratories as control areas. The Fire Protection Code refers to laboratory units. They're almost, but not quite exactly the same thing. And so that's where it kind of gets into that arbitration within that. So from a standpoint of, proposing or asking for exceptions or variances to the state code, there's a process for that, not just about labs, but, there's, you can, look at how you want to modify things relative to state. I would say that I think the larger challenge is making sure that when you have the building department looking at one set of codes and you have the fire marshal looking at other codes, is getting those two entities together and making sure that, okay, it makes sense. We're going to all agree that we're going to follow this designation. We're going to look at this. 30 years ago, before the National Building Code, it was pretty much a given that we just defaulted to NFPA. Because it was a very straightforward and workable kind of organizational approach. It's a little bit more complicated now, although there has been convergence between the codes, and they're a lot closer than they used to be. So.
I would echo all of that. I also like to go back to figuring out who your end customer is going to be and trying to figure out where they fit into their different codes. Not all life science companies created equal. You've got clinical trials, you've got diagnostics, you've got manufacturing, and then you've got pure R&D, and each one has a unique set of needs. And making sure that whatever codes that you're looking at or whatever designation you're going for meets what the end users want. Just slapping something on there does not help anybody. Really take the time to meet with them and figure out, who are you? What are you doing?
And to the one thing that the local jurisdictions probably have more under their control relative to the point about zoning, and I appreciate the comment Nicole made that they've changed their zoning, recognizing this. And we're actually even seeing this in established markets like Research Triangle Park. That's 60 years of effort at a state, municipal level, county, university, all of that together working for 60 years to create. I mean, that did not happen by accident, but even they are changing their approach because it was historically a very traditional zoning approach. You had office buildings over here, you had residential over here, you had retail over here. Everything was kind of divvied up in its sectors. They're beginning to introduce new zoning that basically allows residential, office and research, retail, all happening within the same site as a true mixed use development. Because to my earlier point is, Atlanta, first, I lived in Atlanta for 30 years. Driving anywhere can be a challenge. We all know that. So the ability to walk from your house or your townhome or whatever it is to your office, to retail, and then to your workplace is huge. And because you're competing for the same people that San Diego, Boston, San Francisco, RTP, everybody else is chasing, in there, creating those kind of communities that really are truly livable communities that are very integrated and you don't have to get into your car can be very attractive. It's not the only solution out there, and there's all sorts of other models, but that is something that we are seeing a lot of these days from our developer clients, is putting residential next to the lab there and integrating it in the community around them and not putting up a fence around it.
Excellent. And to your point, Don, we are excited about some upcoming developments in the region that are kind of following that mixed use model, integrating retail with residential and of course with labs. And so we do have a question, hand raised by Pam Sutton in the audience. We're going to invite her to ask that question right now. Pam, go ahead.
Can you hear me? And
Yes,
it's not Pam Sutton, it's actually John Bradbury from Johns Creek. And, actually, in honor of my Massachusetts friends, I want to quote JFK, who loved to tell the story of the old man that came to a wall and he needed to climb the wall and he didn't know that he could do it. So what he did was he took his hat off and he threw his hat over the wall so that he had to climb the wall. Going back to the question about, are we going to have a certification program? I'm interested to know, when are we ready to get started? What's our pathway? What's our timeline? When does this become real and concrete?
I'll chime in. Mayor Bradbury, always good to hear from you. Glad you could join us, and thanks for your enthusiasm and support of the industry. So this was a first step, having this, and we're very grateful for it. It doesn't sound like it's a terribly painful process to get this done. I think it's just making sure we have the right people at the table. So what I can promise you is that no later than the end of the year, but hopefully we can actually get this process started and have a small convening of our ecosystem council before the end of the summer, so mid to late August. And I can come to that meeting with some draft materials so we can get this done in the next few months at the most. And anyone that may want to help us think through this and expedite the process would be great. We are a very lean team at the organization, so it is a little bit tight, but with some support from Ben and of course EJ and Eddie and a few of our council members, I think this is something we can push along rather quickly now that we've had this kickoff discussion and there seems to be enthusiasm for it.
That's great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Bradbury, for that, and apologies for the misnaming there. Just to move on as we continue towards 2 o'clock, wanted to bring this question up to Ben, and of course, again, we invite anyone else to raise their hand as part of the audience to ask a question live like that, or drop it in the Q&A. Ben, you talked about some of the schools around Cambridge and Kendall, such as Harvard and MIT, as well as some of the growth going on, like you mentioned, miles and miles even outside of the city. How important is that proximity to educational institutions like that for growth of these industries?
So I think it's two-pronged, right? There's certainly the research coming out of some of the academic institutions, and obviously that's why the development's going on right near Georgia Tech, right? But we also have 120 colleges and universities here in Massachusetts, and many of them, regardless of where they are in location to biotech hubs, are focusing on creating pathways for their students to be part of the biotech community. So, you obviously have the tech transfer side, which is turning into companies and receiving funding from the NIH, but then you also have the industry side or the academic side as it relates to workforce. And we're starting to see industry start to do projects on campus to make sure that they're training workforce directly. But I think it's critical to what we have here in Massachusetts, right? We don't have good weather. We don't have great traffic, but we have some really smart people, and that's what we hang our hat on, and that's what we're able to use to create this ecosystem up here in Massachusetts. But certainly we have our own challenges up here, right? We have a housing shortage, so keeping some of the students that are graduating is problematic, and the housing's not cheap either. So we have a lot to work on as we think about maintaining our position in the industry. So it's not as if we don't have our own challenges as well.
I'd like to chime in with a real world example. So Clark built the University of Maryland Idea Factory, and it was purpose built to help create makerspace for spin-out companies from the University of Maryland. And what it allowed the students to do, or faculty to do, or anyone who had a really good idea, was to take that idea in a safe space to really build it out and then to launch their company from it. And we completed that several years ago, and it's just been an absolute rock star for the state of Maryland and the BioCapital region. So having something like that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that kind of hit the nail on the head. One of the things that we saw that really accelerated things up here in Massachusetts was the part of the initial funding for the Life Sciences Initiative went to the creation of Lab Central, which is a world-renowned incubator here in Massachusetts, and it allowed scientists, a couple scientists with an idea to go to a bench, share resources like equipment, a kitchen, all that, and then either get the success or failure faster, right? Because that's what it's all about. And then they would expand here in Massachusetts if they succeeded. But the state investing in a nonprofit incubator really helped accelerate what was happening. And now we have 20 incubator members of MassBio, which are housing close to 350 small companies, which we hope turn into some of the larger biotech companies down the line. So I think, Jonathan, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a great thing to do in Georgia.
And I think the point of that being a safe space to be able to experiment, because the reality of it is most startups don't make it. There's a whole path, and there's what's called the valley of death, and they don't get past but that's the nature of the ecosystem and how we do things. But you've got to have that place where people can fail without it, being catastrophic. It's a place where people can take those kinds of risks from a business standpoint, not from a life safety standpoint, but from a business standpoint, take those risks to advance it. And, if 1 out of 10 succeeds, that's amazing. Hopefully we can even improve that, but that's critically important to have those kinds of resources.
Yeah, you all saw in the drug pipeline that I showed, the number that get filed from the number that are in phase 1 is minimum. 90% of these drugs fail. So failure is okay. Actually, failure is good rather than keeping a bad idea alive for longer.
Yep.
The other part that I wanted to bring up, so we built the UCSF Sandler Neuroscience Center out in San Francisco. And it was a collaboration between UCSF's healthcare system and the higher ed. And I know that there's world-class healthcare systems in Atlanta and in the surrounding area. And so be able to pair the great ideas that come out of the med schools with the great ideas that come out of the higher education system, because both of them, they don't operate in silos, they operate together. And being able to co-locate them and provide institutional grant funding to just get them off the ground. And UCSF did a really good job of doing that when they built the Sandler Center. And if we can, I know that Emory University and Georgia Tech are already doing that, but if we can expand that, the results can be compounded becomes a logarithmic curve as opposed to, just a straight line.
And this is not new in Georgia. I think if anybody on this call remembers, Dr. Dennis Leota at Emory 20 years ago was the discoverer of Amtriva, which is a very early AIDS medication and has been huge in improving life outcomes for folks. And that came out of research at Emory and resulted in a $500 million windfall from them when they sold the rights to Gilead and others in there. So again, maybe a little bit more of a traditional model back based on Bay-Doyle about how intellectual capital is monetized. But nowadays, taking that and starting up your own company to develop it and then selling it to a pharma, I mean, that's exactly what's happening in RTP, Massachusetts, everywhere else.
And our COVID therapy as well came out of Emory.
Yep.
From
Yeah.
Emory Drive. So as we get closer to closing it out, I just want to make one comment. Placemaking is something that we as an organization have been really working towards for quite some time. It has been determined through multiple research studies with Georgia Research Alliance and others that facilities continue to be a big challenge for our small startups of, let's say, accessible and affordable facilities for those early stage companies. So examples like what Massachusetts has done in Lab Central, what RTP did a few governors ago to establish the biotech center there, of course, in San Diego and even in San Francisco, and actually in Seattle, and most recently in our region in Charlotte. You see investments from municipalities or the state working to incentivize creating that shared incubator that isn't necessarily dedicated to just one university. So placemaking is still critical, I think, especially in this environment where we have more interest in co-working. So co-working labs is a critical place. We have new members of our community here, like Portal Innovations, which will fill a gap, but unfortunately just a very small gap right now. So one place is just not enough. We are a very spread out community. We have, our medical universities in Augusta. And we have University of Georgia up in Athens and Albany doing a lot in food and ag. So ways to create places for all those communities to come together in some respect is a critical piece to building this ecosystem. And the state has been a great partner in that through Governor Kemp and of course previous governors. And we as an organization through our advocacy arm are looking to prioritize revitalizing an existing piece of budget item called the Life Sciences Facilities Fund. As a priority going to our legislative session next year, which provides no interest loans for building out these facilities. So we're very excited to work with Department of Community Affairs, I believe. If I got that wrong, I apologize. And the commissioner there as we move into next session. So there's an interest in here. We can look forward to continuing to work with the state, but also working with those municipalities that have made it very clear that they're prioritizing life sciences and wanting to attract them. So with that, I'll be quiet, but Jane, you came off mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I just want to say we're grateful for all of this information today. I heard the word complicated more than once, but I'm not one that likes that word because, you can explain it to us and we can do it. Guys, you have a lot of folks on here that we're fortunate to have, our community development people who understand that it does take more than one coding process. They'll step in and get it done for us. So we're grateful for that. Our 159 counties, we are spread out, but we sure do have life sciences all across the state. And we're excited about this next step and moving forward with that. I mean, our lab space is growing, but never fast enough. We want to be able to get these designated areas in there and move people toward that. Jonathan, to you, I would love to know what the end user is for every project that comes across our desk. And that would be the perfect situation. But I think there are pieces, as you suggested today, all of you have suggested, that we can do in that interim to put another foot forward as we go forward with this. So I just want to say thanks, to all of you, and we appreciate this, and we look forward to next steps, and you know how to get a hold of any of us.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to throw out a last minute question that popped in my head. We've talked about labs and startups, but do y'all want to speak to, Georgia is a very large state, as you know, and we have a huge rural community and lots of land. And it's always 75 and sunny. But or I should say 85 and sunny. But can you speak to, different communities might be better suited for smaller types of ecosystems and facilities, whereas others might be more suited for manufacturing, distribution, which is a big supply chain logistics, is a big capacity we have in the state. So could you just speak to that aspect of being bio-ready, if you will?
Sure. So the idea of different types being for different sizes, one thing we didn't really touch on is the idea of all the support industries that go into what is a life science. So when you think about a manufacturing facility, they have to take all of the syringes, all of the raw materials, all of the packaging, all of the cold storage. That has to come from somewhere. That's not just baked into one company. And so all of those support industries that go into it, they all require space, they all require their own unique needs. And there's one thing that we're trying to do here in Virginia is attract generic API, which is absolutely fantastic. And you also have to have all the cold storage that goes with it. You also have to have all the packaging that goes with it. And Georgia is uniquely placed to have all of the support industry that goes with that. Cold storage with vaccines, with biologics, with large molecules, small molecules, all of the packaging that has to go into it, all of that requires space, all of that requires its own unique needs. And it's extremely necessary in order to get the ecosystem that we've been talking about off the ground. You can't just be targeted at one industry and then hope everything else comes along. You have to take an all of the above approach.
Absolutely. And, Georgia is blessed with excellent road network. We have excellent roads in Georgia, some of the best in the nation. And you got, obviously, I don't even have to mention Hartsfield from a connectivity standpoint. So it's easy to get anywhere. And getting the, one thing that we haven't really touched on today, but something that is also key to, and Ben, I'd love for you to comment on this, is the finance and capital side of the innovation economy and the life sciences economy in there, which obviously it goes up, it goes down. Interest rates are obviously a big issue. That's, our life science developer clients are very sensitive to that. So, it comes and goes in there. But maybe, Ben, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that piece of the market, which, is mature in other places than not. And I'm curious what the thoughts are relative to Georgia's position there.
Are you referring to the funding of development or the funding of the life sciences research itself?
Yeah, funding the startup companies, but also, like for instance, developers. We work with the Wexfords, the Longfellows. These are private developers who do life science facilities, and they're doing it in, RTP, they're doing it in Boston, they're doing it in San Francisco. We've had conversations with them about Georgia, and they're interested in looking, but not a lot of them are active in the Georgia marketplace yet because it's a developing region. So they're monitoring it even if they're not active there. But on the finance side, either developer or maybe even more specifically to like your startup companies, maybe for the folks on this call, that might be a good point to make.
Yeah, we can start with the developers because the challenges you're facing in Georgia right now, we're facing in Massachusetts. Anything that is not currently in the ground is not getting started up here. And that's for obvious reasons. And part of that is the money flowing to our early stage companies has dried up significantly as well. Part of the beauty of Massachusetts is the fact that we've, think about where we are, right? We're in 2023. This industry really kicked off in Massachusetts in 1985. That gives us 38 years of know-how that we have up here. And the beauty is that people who started those early stage companies in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, they have done quite well for themselves. And a lot of them have decided to take their know-how and go into the venture community. So we have investors in Massachusetts that understand what should be invested in and the science that should be invested in. And I think if you look back, actually, we release a report every year called our industry snapshot, and it documents money flowing in Massachusetts. 2000 was a great year. 2021 was a record-breaking year, $13.5 billion here. Last year was $8 billion. And this year is probably going to be lower than that. And I think part of that is we got so many generalist investors involved during COVID because they saw the successes of a Moderna or other companies like that. And now those generalist investors are pulling out because they saw the success of Moderna. They may have been investing in science that shouldn't have been invested in, or teams that shouldn't have been invested in. Because I think at the end of the day, the people are the most important thing. You're investing in science, but you're also investing in where you can build a team. So I think that's what we've seen up here. It's slowed down a little bit. We're starting to see, we just had an IPO announced yesterday, first biotech IPO for Massachusetts after we had 38 in 2021. So I think we're starting to see money flow again. But it's always going to be a challenge. You know, as we think about manufacturing and more space, this goes back to the fact that we've been in this for 38 years. You know, what we have here in Massachusetts is not going to be the same manufacturing that you have down in Georgia, at least initially, right? The cost of doing business up here and the price per square foot and the cost of energy is so much higher. So we're going to be small batch, maybe clinical stage manufacturing for the most part, whereas I see Georgia, at least initially, being commercial stage. I know you have Takeda down there already, commercial manufacturing, but given time and as the innovation ecosystem grows in the academic hubs, those companies are going to need to find places to do their manufacturing as well, which brings the rural community or the less expensive land community, whether it's rural or not, into the equation. And we're starting to see that with some gateway cities and former port cities here in Massachusetts, where we're seeing smaller scale manufacturing happen. But the challenge with the manufacturing, the reason it's going there is they need more space. A lot of the manufacturing facilities are 1 or 2 floors max with a large floor plan, whereas you can vertically integrate the labs. So you need somewhere that you can have space. So that's kind of where I see the rural community getting in. But the key is, and this goes back to the 2 questions that we get companies to ask. The first is, how fast can we be operational? The second is, where can I find my workers, right? So these communities need to be ready and need to be training people, whether it's at, you know, we have programs here in Massachusetts that are starting to really focus on biotech STEM in elementary schools, so that 15 years from now, those people will understand what it takes to work in our industry.
Yeah, many of the large pharma companies in New Jersey, New York have STEM engagement programs
Right.
that they actually do as a private corporation. They bring in local high school students because they have the same challenges. They're trying to find the people to work in their facilities, and you got to get them when they're in high school.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back
Well,
to
we
the
specialize in it, Georgia BioEd.
There you are.
Our institute specializes in that, yeah.
I'd like to go back to the funding piece real fast. So there's a different time horizon for biotech companies when it comes to funding. So a lot of the tech things that you see that come out of Silicon Valley have a timeline horizon of 2 to 5 years, maybe. And by the time you put in your investment, 2 to 5 years later, you get your exit. With biotech companies, it can take 20 years to go from an initial seed investment to the time where you really start making your money back. And along that line, it takes, you know, the last number that I saw was $1.5 billion to get a drug out of an academic environment into commercial manufacturing. But the payoff is astronomical. So if you can get in at an early stage and then sustain that funding over a 20-year time horizon, your return can be 20, 30, and if you're a Seagen that just got bought, you can be 50x. Yep. So it is a long-term investment horizon. It takes a lot of money and a lot of risk, but with risk comes a lot of reward, and you can have an exponential payoff.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think I want to just jump in and tell a story about something that happened up here in Massachusetts, right? And often this industry gets a bad rap because of the cost of medications and therapies and drugs. But we've touched on part of the reasons why that happens, right? 90% of drugs fail. So to encourage innovation, you have to be able to make some money on it. And I use my former CEO's family story as my own often. Maria's nodding. She knows what I'm talking about. So our former CEO, Bob Coughlin, his son, his third child, was the first child ever diagnosed with cystic fibrosis in utero here in Massachusetts. And the assumption was that Bobby was always going to pass away at an early age. Fast forward to 2019, and he's an 18-year-old kid, and he's probably got 2 years left to live. And he takes his first dose of Trikafta, which is a triple combination product that was developed and researched by Vertex, which is here in Massachusetts. Since then, or before that, Bobby Coughlin was a $600,000 a year patient on the entire system without drugs, right? He was going to the hospital stays, physical therapy, XYZ, you name it. Trikafta comes out and it's $350,000 a year, which sounds dramatic, right? But he took it. He's taken it since then. He's grown. He now has 95% lung function. He's going to outlive his parents. He's grown 4 inches and gained 60 pounds since he was 18 years old and has not spent a single night in the hospital in 4 years, right? So that's when we think about what this can do for patients and why investing in this industry is risky, but what the payoff can be. It's not just from a ROI perspective, but it's something that you can really put a finger on and see in people that you engage with every single day.
That's our why, right, Ben? Those
That's
stories.
our why.
That's it. Yep. So at the end of the day, it's about people and the health of our community.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Eddie, that might be a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think just to wrap it up again, thanks for all the great insights between everyone on this call, specifically shouting out Don and Jonathan and Ben, but of course with our community and EJ and Maria and myself, we're really happy to be able to present this to you all today and have the community engaged. And to the last point on what we were talking about, we know that ultimately the work we're doing in economic development and in life sciences will impact the people very literally through the medicines and the procedures and the devices that we engage with, but also in the jobs that are brought and the economic mobility that will be grown, that I know that these communities are not only working on in life sciences, but all over and engaging with their local communities with. So with that, I'll bring it back to Maria to close us out.
No, I think we're good with that. I'd just like to say thank you again to all of our speakers. Any final remarks from anybody? Are we good?
I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to us about your needs. We've got a great in-house MEP system. We've got people that have lived, breathed, and built these businesses from the ground up. So anybody who wants to reach out, I'm sure that Don and I's contact information can be posted if it's not posted already, and we look forward to talking with you.
If you have people that want to nerd out about the codes and
Yes.
conversations with the fire marshal and building it, glad to have that conversation. We live it day in and day out. So yeah.
Great. And what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up to all of our attendees with everyone's information, and not necessarily yours, Ben, unless you want that, but definitely your deck. And obviously we're here for all of our Georgia colleagues, and EJ and Eddie and I look forward to reaching out to our community to get working on that certification program. And I'll just put to the community, start thinking of some cool ideas, because BioReady Cities is already trademarked. So we need to come up with our own peachy version. Yes, I'll be that cheesy.
Yeah. Feel free to share my information, and if anyone's ever up in Massachusetts, feel free to reach out and kind of see what we have going on up here.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks Eddie and EJ for helping pull this together. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Katie, you can shut it down.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.